last ACT-CTU rounds for this before the summer, and then we'll resume in September. And we have Dr. Marina Klein to kick this day off. I think many of you know her. If you don't, she's a professor of the Department of Medicine at McGill University, senior scientist at the RI, national director of the CIHR Pan-Canadian Network for HIV and STBBI Clinical Trials Network, CTN Plus. And I'm adding this here, but she's been a huge advocate for clinical trials here at the RI and has really helped us with our ACT initiative. So I thank you for that, Marina. There's a lot more here I have to read. So she's an internationally recognized clinical scientist and holder of a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair. She's dedicated her research advancing research in HIV, Hep C, and other chronic viral infections with a particular focus on improving outcomes for vulnerable populations. She also leads Montreal Sans Hep C, an ambitious initiative working to make Montreal the first city in North America to eliminate Hep C. Through her leadership of CTN Plus, she's also helped to build and strengthen one of Canada's most successful clinical trial networks, fostering collaboration across researchers, healthcare providers, patient communities, and partners across the country. So she's going to speak about this network. And I think for many of us who are not directly involved in the network, we definitely want to know what are the nuts and bolts and how we can learn from this. So thanks, Marina.
Thanks so much, Shishmita. That's great. And it's great. I know it's summer and everyone's busy, so I'm pleased that people are here today. Yeah, so as Shishmita said, I'm going to be talking about our network and how it's evolved over time and really where we're trying to take it in the future. I always start the presentations. It's particularly important, I think, for the populations of patients and partners that we serve to do a land acknowledgement. And Montreal is seated on the unceded territory of the Mohawk peoples and part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I make this really in the spirit of reconciliation and to improve collaboration. We have an expressed motivation to do this within our network, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing that today. So just to say, CTN is now CTN Plus. So for many, many years, it was known as CTN, HIV Clinical Trials Network, and you'll see why the plus has been added. And it's really, I'm here only because I can build on a track record of extensive success over many years. So this was the old logo. As you can see, we've updated it. And it was really, has been around as probably one of the oldest clinical trials networks that have been supported nationally by CIHR. It was originally through Health Canada and through something called the Federal Initiative to Fight HIV/AIDS, which was a response to the emerging epidemic of HIV and the crisis around the blood blood transfusions that invested as a parliamentary mandate to support work in not only research but a response to the HIV crisis, and that those funds were allocated to the Public Health Agency of Canada, to Correctional Services, to Health Canada itself, and administered originally through Health Canada, and to the establishment of a clinical trials network for HIV. And that's important because although now we receive our funding through CIHR, it's sort of ring-fenced in a way, because it still would require an act of parliament to change that funding. Though increasingly there's been pressure for it to get assumed into the general pool, and we're often in this kind of give and take with them, and, and to protect this funding, which we believe it still remains important to this day, even though a lot of people would say, we've done, HIV has come such a long way. It's not as big a crisis anymore. We don't need to be investing perhaps disproportionately in a network for HIV. And that's also influenced what CIHR has done in terms of pushing us towards new directions, and really why we had to reimagine the network as it is now. So to say that this has been going on for 30 years, it's really been driving HIV's research towards treatment, prevention, and finding a cure, supported over 300 studies, enrolled over 20,000 people living with or at risk for HIV and sexually transmitted STBBI, sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections, in case you're not in that range. We've engaged more than 160 investigators and community members across the country and trained, I think this is one of the things we're proudest of, over 100 postdoctoral fellows, most of whom, including myself, including many of the leaders in the network today, were former CTN postdocs. So it really did start as a network that was responding to a crisis. And so the early trials were really focused on finding treatments for people living with HIV who had no access to antiretroviral therapies, because we didn't even know about antiretroviral therapies and how they could work at the beginning. So it was really on opportunistic infections. So some of the larger studies around the Mycobacterium avium. Then in 1996, when antiretroviral therapy became accessible, some of the earliest studies to show the benefit of triple combination antiretroviral therapy were born in this network and were actually showcased at the International Conference in 1998 in Vancouver. Then, we went to an era where we were dealing with people who had survived that early time and had drug treatment failure. And so there were trials on multi-drug resistance. And then we're moving into the more modern era where we're looking at preventing new HIV infections with new biomedical prevention tools, which I'm going to actually talk quite a bit more about today, and managing comorbidities of people living for a long time with HIV. So cardiovascular disease being one of the major comorbidities that we see. We participated in some of the large international trials. One of them was called Reprieve, which has really been practice changing about the role of statins in preventing cardiovascular disease among people living with HIV. And then more recently moving outside of HIV to respond to some related epidemics, such as the Mpox epidemic, where we just completed a feasibility trial for an antiviral for Mpox, and DISCO, which is a great name, which is about comparing doxycycline as a pre-exposure prophylaxis or post-exposure prophylaxis to prevent STBBIs in people living with or at risk for HIV. That's our current trials ongoing. So really, there have been many new challenges, and I would say also many new opportunities in the current era. Obviously, the changing epidemiology and key populations that are affected by HIV in our country and worldwide, and we'll talk quite a bit about that and how in particular it's impacting the prairies and indigenous communities in prairie provinces. This growing epidemic alongside HIV, even though HIV now we have treatments for and prevention for, some of that has led to, for want of a better word, liberalization in other types of prevention that's such as condoms or abstinence or other ways of preventing acquiring HIV, has meant that STBBIs have become much more prevalent in many of the same populations. So we're seeing rising rates of syphilis, congenital syphilis in this country. We're seeing rising rates of gonorrhea and chlamydia. And so this is one of the other things that we really want to be able to bring our expertise to address now. Obviously, COVID-19 changed our whole world. Don't have to say more there. And I already mentioned Mpox, which is a new sexually transmitted infection that was a large epidemic and actually concentrated quite a lot in Canada because of the way we happened to be exposed early on. At the same time, we have a lot of new advances in terms of how we approach these problems. So really much more emphasis on community engaged approaches, community-based research approaches that have really matured, advances in trials methodology. I know this is something that this group has been particularly interested in, and our ability to integrate more widely into international and national networks. So CIHR, in its wisdom, looking at this and saying the evolution of this network, they, for the first time, a year and a half ago, or the call was 2 years ago or whatever, it changed from a directed call for the network to an open call for the network. And they actually imposed new conditions on our network. That is, that we need to expand into different STBBIs, so not all have a sole focus on HIV, but also return to a focus where we considered regional diversity, regional priorities, and move away from a centralized model to one that was more diversified. So we were tasked with creating regional nodes as well as addressing all these other infections. And we wanted to do this to build on what we think has been a very successful model, is that still at the center is science, and that has to drive new knowledge. That knowledge has to be translated back to community, but the community also has to be informing that science the whole way around. And so this is something that we've tried to embed in our network and with this new call to try to enhance that. And of course, we had to do all this with the same budget envelope. So that's the reality of today's marketplace. And this was a vision that we articulated in that application, is that we want to continue to lead research from prevention to cure in an impactful, inclusive, and collaborative countrywide network that advances clinical trials in HIV and STBBIs. And just to say here, to stop, when we talk about clinical trials, we're really talking about evaluating interventions that could improve health or other outcomes. And that spans a spectrum of different ways of evaluation. So it's not simply classic randomized controlled trials. And so how do we do this? Well, first we had to establish regional teams. And actually a good part of the budget of our trials network goes to supporting these teams. That's pretty obvious in Quebec, Ontario, and in BC, where there's been a long-standing track record of doing work, having strong academic institutions. Not so obvious outside major urban centers, though. So that's one of the things that we're trying to promote with these regional teams, but less so in the Atlantic and the prairies, where that capacity hasn't been built or isn't there. And so we had to find ways to support those regions and build things. And we recognizing that everyone's at a bit of a different place in their evolution. And we're still working that out, I think. We're starting to see some progress, I would say. But it is challenging because to start something from scratch, understand how to engage, coordinate, actually get, I think you know this from the ACT-CTU kind of example, like it's you have to build from a ground up, and it really takes people who have time and dedication to do this. And we all do this sort of on a voluntary capacity. So it can be difficult. And then the rationale behind this is really to address needs for local coordination, to be able to support training and methodologic needs closer to the community, and in particular to recognize this disproportionate needs of the prairies, which I'm going to focus on a bit more in a second. As you know, we didn't have a northern region. We recognized in this application that was going to take a long time to build. And so we're only now starting a process of northern engagement. And BC and Yukon seems to already have that natural alignment, and there's investigators who already had it, and we may have something like that in Quebec here to some extent. But there's also this kind of transversal thing that we have to be aware of, and we have to build relationships and trust in those communities, and it's going to take some time. So we've just started that. I mentioned community, and I think we've made a concerted effort to expand the role of community across the need, both in leadership and priority setting. So traditionally, we've always had a community advisory committee, and the role has been principally to come in and review studies at the end. When a study comes in for support to us, it gets reviewed by our scientific review committee and the community advisory committee. They provide a feedback, usually on an informed consent form and any issues that relate to community, but it's very at the end of the pathway. And so they have really no input into the design of the research, the selection of the research question, how it could be evolved. And so we're trying to move that upstream. And we also recognize the need to expand our outreach to a variety of community members, because there's, you probably have worked on community advisory committees, and it's often those very dedicated people, but the same ones are always there. And their same ones are either always doing the work, but it's also the same people's opinions that you're always hearing. And I think, especially in our field, there's such a diversity of people who are now affected, and age, across the age spectrum, across risk factors, across communities, that we need to expand that. And there's a program, I won't have time to go into, but we can talk at the end perhaps about, called the Community Science Champions Program, which is really to help train community members to understand how it is to participate in something like this, or to participate in research. And then there'll be a reversal of training investigators how to work with the community. And so that's a program that was out of our Knowledge Mobilization Hub, which is really getting off the ground. It's kind of exciting. And as I mentioned before, we have a specific Indigenous guidance, we're calling it the Indigenous Guidance Circle. So this is to bring together a group of Indigenous community members to help us ensure that our research remains respectful to Indigenous ways, but also to help us on specific issues that we have, for example, around data governance, around how do we actually meaningfully engage with Indigenous people when we're doing research that involves them. Because many times we have to check that box on our CIHR applications, and people either avoid it because they know that's going to open a whole kettle of fish. So we're trying to have a consultative process around that now. Our major scientific aims and priorities are aligned here: prevention and testing, treatment and management. My slides got funny. Immunotherapies and cure, and then a new these are what we're calling think tanks, a new one that's focused solely on methods that we didn't used to have. I'll talk quite a bit more about that in a sec. So these are the think tanks. Their idea is to bring a wider range of experts together to look at what our cross-cutting science and help us develop some network-wide studies that can address the key priorities for the network. And they will interact with the regional teams to help them push forward research that is relevant to their area. I think it's important to say, and I think people probably know this, that CIHR has funded us to do infrastructure. We support trials. We cannot fund trials. So every trial that's developed through our network, with the exception of some seed funds, has to be externally financed. And so our hope is that we can improve the number of and the quality of the trials that we can get funded. And so we've rejigged our sort of funding streams. So I mentioned we have some money to support seed funding. That's really to get people to get preliminary evidence that could help support a further application. And we've targeted this to support regional needs and in hope of supporting particularly early career researchers and some EDI considerations. And these are allocated annually by the regions, and then they are reviewed by a common peer review committee within our network to ensure that they meet high quality. Then we have a stream called portfolio trials, and these are basically investigator-initiated studies that they've developed because they address a specific priority. They could be developed anywhere within the region and supported by the think tank, but they are typically the CIHR-funded trials that then come to us for support. And we can provide support across a number of things such as data management, regulatory affairs, knowledge mobilization. I'm going to say something. Yeah, those are the big ones. Yeah. And then we can negotiate like statistics in analysis. And some of this is on a cost recovery basis. Some of this is in kind. And again, I'll talk, we're trying to move their request for that support upstream to us at the time of the letter they ask for a letter of support so that we actually can plan for what sorts of infrastructure we're going to need and the costs, and they can budget it appropriately in their trial when they actually apply for funding. So that's something we've been trying to work on. It's working more or less. And then we have this new category of studies called the flagship studies. And these are the ones that I mentioned that will be developed by think tanks, limited number of cross-cutting themes that will be run across the network on like big and properly powered big studies that we can actually carry out as a network to be practice changing. And so as I mentioned, we're really trying to make our CTN support upstream, all the way from the point of study selection, where we can have early community involvement, early methodologic involvement. And with these flagship trials, we are encouraging them to move through the network in a consultative kind of collaborative way from the idea stage. And we're upfront investing in them with a risk that they won't actually ever pan out or ever be funded. So we're putting methodologic support, and then we would help proposal writing, help with the funding application, because they will be selected by our network as being a priority. And we think that doing it that way, we have a much higher chance that they'll be actually funded and will be carried out. And I'll show you an example of a big one we've been working on. Then we can do the early regulatory review. We have in-house person who's extremely experienced, who's fantastic for all the regulated stuff. We have a DSMB. That's the other thing that we do offer in kind. So, and our knowledge mobilization hub. So, so if we look at what's happening right now in terms of our treatment cores, so as I mentioned, we have this early methodologic support to help them, and then community is involved in all those. Yeah, please, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I've got time. Hopefully organized. I should have said that at the beginning. Please interrupt. Yeah.
Just a question about your process. I really liked the previous slide and how it's like multi-level kind of involvement and support.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the study selection and the idea, is that something that you as a network put out? Like, what are the priority areas based on what's coming from the community? Like, for example, we need, new treatments, or maybe like it's decentralized trial designs or whatever, because we're not reaching certain populations, and you put something out and then people come to you with those ideas? Or is that something that's kind of...
So it's a bit organic, but each of the think tanks is supposed to be doing that work in the think tank, and within those experts coming together. And the think tanks, I should say, include community members, the methodologists, and well, the methodologists actually support all the think tanks, and early career investigators, and an Indigenous liaison. So every think tank is actually leadership is comprised of at least those people and the scientists, and then they have a wider group of people with whom they're supposed to meet and interact. And we've been pushing this to happen at various time points throughout the year, so it's not just all at our annual meeting. And we have meetings in the fall and in the winter where they will pitch their ideas to the wider community, and then we'll have this discussion, and then one will come to the top, and then that one will be the one that's focused on. And so that's sort of what's happening here. So out of our last year, for example, out of prevention and testing, a project around minimal monitoring strategy for HIV PrEP among GBM and transgender women came out. From the treatment and management, a multi-center adaptive platform trial targeted mentoring for geriatric syndromes came out. So there are lots of ideas discussed, but these are the ones that kind of percoled up to the top, and these are the ones that we said we would help to support going forward. Then they have to move it from the idea stage to a more concrete proposal. That gets vetted within our scientific and community committees, and then that will go forward for full application if it goes with. So it gives us multiple opportunities to intervene and address and support. And then the immunotherapies and cure, setting the stage for hepatitis B cure trials in Canada. So I'm going to show you an example of one. This one sort of came out a little bit out of the whole flagship study type of process that I would just explain, because it was identified during our strategic planning exercise that happened right after the grant was funded in the fall, that there was this serious need for prevention, particularly in the prairies. So this is the need. So if we look at the national rates of HIV in Canada, these are 2023 data. We're waiting for the 2024 data. We can see that the dark red, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, the rates are far in excess of the other provinces in Canada, almost 20 per 100,000 population. If you look at, we compare incidence overall in the United States, it's 11. Even in the highest incidence areas, we're talking like inner city DC, it's 24. So this is an emergency. In fact, Manitoba has just declared a public health emergency with respect to HIV. This is happening principally in populations of who are Indigenous and heterosexually acquired. It was originally driven by an injection drug use epidemic, and now it's more generalizing. So 50% of the people affected are women, and there's no prevention coverage in these places at all. So we now know, as you'll see, I'll explain it, we have tools, we're just not employing them. And so we also have unmet needs for a number of other diverse populations, people who failed our oral PrEP, women, recent migrants, people who inject drugs. They're all people who have failed to really access prevention. So this is one way of showing that failure. This is something called the HIV PrEP to need ratio, and that's simply the number of PrEP people on PrEP per new infections in a given place. So Saskatchewan at the top, you can see it's extraordinarily low. Manitoba over here, extraordinarily low. Quebec, we're doing not too bad, but we have ways to go. I mean, the standout is British Columbia. Part of that relates to the populations affected, though, and the epidemiology, which was principally an epidemic of gay and bisexual men who have sex with men in British Columbia. They access PrEP much more effectively. Now we're seeing in Quebec, for example, we have a lot of migrant populations affected, and they're less likely to be engaged. And like everything PrEP, there's a sort of cascade. So you have to be eligible, you have to be at risk, but you have to be aware. And a lot of people, I think awareness is one of our major challenges. And then willing to take an intervention to prevent, have access to it, take it up, adhere, and persist. So these are sort of the kind of outcomes along a cascade. And initiation, adherence, and persistence are really key components of this cascade that we're interested in finding. So a revolution in PrEP has come about in the last few years, and that's injectable PrEP. So we see, for example, cabotegravir, which is the first licensed injectable PrEP in Canada. It's worldwide. We have it reimbursed in Quebec, Ontario, and in Saskatchewan, Manitoba now, is superior to tenofovir FTC. Superior because of an adherence issue. People who take oral PrEP have very high protection if they take it regularly. But like any pill, especially in a context when you're healthy, it's hard to maintain that over time, especially for younger people, women, those populations particularly don't well. The second revolutionary finding was lenacapavir. So this is every 6-month injections. So one injection every 6 months, almost 100% protection against HIV infection in very high risk populations. This has been shown in youth, in gay and bisexual men who have sex with men, in heterosexual people in Africa. There's more infections now in the follow-up of these studies, but really very small numbers. It's clearly superior. So if we're looking at the pipeline for long-acting PrEP of the future, it's increasingly going to be injectable, increasingly going to be at longer intervals for those injections, so almost like a vaccine, that people have been calling it that. We also have a phase 3 trial starting of an monthly oral PrEP, which is for some people may be actually a better intervention. So it does require that people want to have an injection. That's not necessarily evident, and there's issues with the injections. So choice is really, I think, if you look at the landscape completely, it's really been associated with higher population level uptake. And now we have these evolving options. So that means that we have to have evolving ways to counsel people about what choices are. And for the populations I mentioned, those tools haven't really yet been developed that well. And so our goal, my fonts are changing, but anyway, is to find a way to provide informed choice and adherence support for oral PrEP or long-acting PrEP in populations in need in Canada through an implementation study. Because when we looked at this, it didn't make sense to be randomizing people. We know that these are effective when they work. What we don't know is when we try to implement them, particularly in populations for who've never received high access to PrEP, whether they will work. And we chose to take this approach, which is a platform trial approach. And thanks to Hansi for this slide, because it's really says why. But really, this has multiple reasons to do this. One, it's for us, it allows us to be quite adaptable as new treatments come in, as new questions arise. If we establish upfront a master sort of approach to doing this with consistent outcomes, consistent evaluations that can be applied across all the studies that we do, then we have possibilities for comparability between trials. We don't have to reinvent the wheel each time we do this. So, and this could be for anything that's currently licensed or upcoming trials. It also allows us to be flexible in regard to how we deal with different regulations and different pathways in different provinces. But also for our purposes, not only for the integrity and the methodologic rigor of the research, it also allows us to go to our pharmaceutical partners and say, listen, we have this platform, you're going to have a single point of entry, and we'll do the negotiations with you for support with a contract with us, and then we will handle all the subcontracting, we will handle the ethics, so it streamlines all the operations. And in past, what they would do when there's post-licensing studies, they would go to investigator A and investigator B, here's $25,000, and you do a little implementation study, which is really a marketing study so that they can see how their drug works in a certain population. We're saying, No, that doesn't ever lead to any advances in science. And we have a big problem here, which we want to be able to show how it can work and what are the sustainability pathways so that people actually get to take this up over the long term. And they, oops, I changed it backwards. They bought into this model. So fortunately, we've been negotiating with two of the large companies around this. And the first one is for this study, which we're calling HIV Prep Can't Wait, thanks to a colleague in Manitoba, Yoav Kenyon, who's leading that. I don't know. Unfortunately, I guess Mac to PC has made some problems with my slides. So we also realized quite quickly that not everyone is ready to get going in an implementation study today, that we need to have some stage 1 activities which are formative that will allow us to assess the needs and document sort of the pre-intervention landscape, what tools are going to be needed for screening, for education around choice, for co-designing other interventions that will be the wraparound services that can support people to access and adhere to PrEP and persist with PrEP over the long term. So that's that education choice, but we have opportunities then in the second stage to implement those education and choice tools and evaluate them. And then once people make a choice, to look at these interventions that enhance the reach and persistence. And then we have a common set of hybrid outcomes that are both clinical outcomes such as HIV incidence, persistence, and some implementation science outcomes, as well as cost effectiveness. And so this is how this has been a very iterative approach. I think it's a really, we've had to push this along with our pharmaceutical potential partners, push people along with respect to thinking about what the methodologic, designs of these are. And all the while trying to move this fast so that we can actually get something done for people who are getting infected. So we formed a working group which has the expertise and has the methods people, the community people, the regional people, and the think tank people from the prevention think tank. They've been working as a small subgroup to develop a protocol. Then we got expressions of interest from people who could actually participate in the study so that we could start to select sites. So we're doing this kind of all iteratively. Then we selected some sites and started to work on how we could prepare them. So once we do have a proposal ready, that we can get going as quickly as possible. And then we are planning to have a co-design committee to help us design these interventions that will be in the stage 2 protocols and so on. And all of this ultimately will undergo peer review within our committees for multidisciplinary peer review from the scientific review committee from outside the people who developed it, that it's actually coherent with our mandate. All the while, we've been talking with our industry partners, and that goalpost is constantly shifting because at first they want to cover everything, and then there's global pressures, and now the price is too high. And, so it's quite a lot of work. We've come to a first stage trial, which has actually been funded through Gilead Sciences for around $600,000 Canadian, which will be a mixed methods observational pre-implementation planning study. And it's really aimed at mapping the current and proposed PrEP pathways, including how we would integrate this long-acting every 6-monthly PrEP into the current clinical setting, to identify the determinants of implementation, co-design the strategies and materials, and characterize readiness to start a rollout. And so this is for sites that haven't had any experience with PrEP, particularly in the prairies, where it could be quite complicated because they're on reserve, they're remote from a physician. We have to look at new models of PrEP delivery. So this allows us to get that first stage work going while we plan to execute a second study, which is a type 2 hybrid clinical implementation study of equitable PrEP delivery. And this one is really to actually do an implementation platform trial where we will look at those I mentioned before, initiation persistence, and evaluation of co-design interventions that are tailored to the population and setting. And we're targeting approximately 300 participants for the study. We're in advanced negotiations with ViiV, who have the licensed and reimbursed drug currently. So our challenge is we're doing this in a context where the company is saying we'll only let you do study. We'll support you to do studies on drugs that are being paid for by the province for by the federal government. We're not going to supply you with drugs because they're in the phase 4. They don't need to. And it's so this is, because they don't want to be having to not to stop those people after a certain period of time. I think it's the basic reason. Once you start on.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think we could develop similar platform trials for various disease-specific areas at the RIMUHC? This is from Dr. Pilat.
Yeah, so great question. Well, hopefully, I think this is what, one of the reasons to be here today and present, and is really to think about what this we can offer as a model. And we are testing this model, so we're in sort of beta phase, but I think it represents a model that is definitely widely applicable and could be tailored and adapted, and it would be great to see that, and we'd be happy to be involved. So right, so we're hoping the impact of this trial will be to be able to bring choice of tailored PrEP options to populations with high need and low uptake, and that we could rapidly scale up PrEP while rigorously evaluating its implementation in this emergency situation. And so, as you can imagine, this also means we have to negotiate with the provincial health authorities, understand the pathways for reimbursement in Manitoba. That's kind of going on at the same time in the background, different process for Saskatchewan. A lot of the participants would be probably covered through NHB because it's federally insured. And hopefully, ultimately, we provide evidence on PrEP uptake, initiation, and persistence. And in fact, actually, I think one of them got cut off. The most important one, which is to reduce HIV incidence in these communities. So I think what I've done up to this point is really to try to demonstrate this added value of a network. And I really do think the convening aspect of having not only experts from across the country, this kind of intersection between regional and national ideas and perspectives, bringing the community perspectives, Indigenous perspectives, and how we can apply this knowledge across pathogens. So it kind of gets back to that question. And also gives us opportunities to share resources, both human and financial, across the network, and leverage our funding against, pharmaceutical company or other funding that could help support some of these studies. And I also think it brings a lot of value to here. So this network was established in British Columbia, has for 30 years lived in British Columbia and Vancouver, and my taking over has meant that we've brought most or much of the activities here. And so it's an opportunity to build and to participate here, particularly with other researchers doing like things together. And so the last bit of this presentation, I just wanted to focus on some potential opportunities for collaboration and support. So Shashmina already mentioned the ACT-CTU. I think this fits really nicely in a lot of the priorities in the ACT-CTU, particularly around methods and trial and design and management. Also, some of how we've approached industry partnerships and training, as well as community engagement. So if we talk about capacity buildings, I think we bring a lot of expertise in design and operating clinical trials. Hansi's in the room, and I think most of you have met her and know her, and she's already supported a lot of committees. Amanda knows her well in terms of just thinking about all the regulatory aspects, REB, how we can improve things to make things more efficient, more accessible to investigators, streamline processes so they don't take so long, because we know of all these structural barriers that really are impediment to carrying out timely research in this country. And so those are sort of listed there as things that we have expertise with in our network. We also have this KM hub, and I don't have time to go into its detail, but they are really, really quite innovative. They're beyond just simply translate, lay language translation of your studies. They're doing some really engagement activities that are really quite interesting. I mentioned the Community Science Champions program that was developed out of there, and the Indigenous Guidance Cert. The other area of capacity building is training, and we have this longstanding postdoctoral fellowship program. So this is last year's fellows. This year we've funded 6 new fellows, I think 3 of which are in the McGill space, like not one here, or 3 in Montreal, 1 at UDM, 1 in McGill. And we co-fund this through funds in the grant, but also with industry partnership. We would love to, and with CanFAR, which is another organization, a not-for-profit, we're looking at MyTax ways to boost this, but we'd love to do co-sponsorship with stuff at the RI. We've been trying very hard with them, but if we could develop some of these things in parallel, I think we could bring easily 50%, and RI could bring 50%. We could double the number of postdocs we fund, and I think that would be fantastic. I mentioned methods, and methods, I mean, this is my personal kind of excitement about this network and what we can do to improve the rigor and adapt ourselves to modern realities of conducting studies. So this is the methods think tank. The three co-leads are on top. You'll recognize two of them because they're from McGill, and I think Lawrence has actually come here to speak as well. So we have, as I mentioned, a variety of methods. So Guillaume is an implementation science expert. Shrin, we know, is specialized in adaptive and Bayesian modeling. Lawrence in a wide range of clinical trial designs, especially EDI and trials as well. And we have, as a hired methodologist, Zoe Moody, who is working currently at Fred Hutch Cancer Institute as a staff scientist. So she's with us only part-time, but is likely to join us full-time as of the fall, as she makes the move to Vancouver. And she has a long experience working with HIV vaccine trials network in the US and in trial design. And she's excellent. So this is the core group, but they have also postdocs and other members. The role of this think tank is really to ensure that our trials are well designed and inclusive, and they produce actionable evidence, and to advance innovative trial methods. So there's actually an academic role of this committee, this think tank. They support, review, and provide methodologic feedback for planned studies and proposals, and support the development and design of our studies. And so we have a process now, they do this. So an investigator who wants methodologic support, there's an intake form, they have a face-to-face meeting with them, then they help them with those aspects. And that we're hoping will increase the success rate of our studies in our network. They're also have developed a network of expertise, and that's where we can hopefully reach a broad range of methodology. So here's an area where this could be of interest to the RI as we establish a group of people with really unique and varied expertise that could then perhaps be made available and called upon for other investigators. And so we already have experts with modeling, health economics, as I mentioned, implementations. Qualitative studies, I think, is an area that they're moving towards. And so this is really going to be a tremendous resource for us. And then finally, innovation. I think this is where we're just starting to think about, once we get all this kind of established and going, what can we do that's really innovative and developed like in our network, and how that can actually help us carry out this work in a more streamlined fashion, including exploring some development of AI tools that might allow us to do that. And we've talked a lot already, I think, around, what are the things we need, all those steps to get a trial going, and CTMS and all that kind of stuff. A lot of these things are traditionally, historically very expensive. And, you have to buy them off the shelf, and you have to multi-year contracts. And with AI tools, maybe there's things we can develop that will help us get those activities done at a much lower cost, but also represent like an academic pursuit. So that's just like a dream thing that we've just started to think about, but happy to hear thoughts and anything that relates to any of these topics. So before I finish and take some more questions, this is not just me. I think we have to really realize there's a lot of people behind me getting this work done, including all the people that aren't on the slide, which are my co-director, Sharon Walmsley, and all the think tank leads and the regional leads. And we have a lot of partnerships that need to be acknowledged, principally, obviously, the CIHR, but also these other partners who are listed on this slide. So, thank you.
There is a comment from Dr. Pilote suggesting that the RI's Canada's Best program is a great way to attract postdocs.
Yes, we tried very hard with them.
And then there is a question from Jenny Koulis.
Yeah.
She's curious, how or is the SIM involved in these trials, and are there opportunities to expand its use impact?
That's a good question, but I think for the moment, like most of what we're talking about is like trial development that's at a later level than what the SIM is currently focused on, which is more like phase 1, phase 2. Our cure and immunotherapies think tank actually would be developing studies that could very well be nested in the SIM, because there's only a few sites here, Ottawa, that really can carry out that work. Because if you think about it, we're talking about, for example, we're going to be the DSMB on a trial, which is a human challenge study for hepatitis C vaccine. That will be out of Toronto. But like you can see that there's some very specialized ones where the SIM could be helpful. Hansi wanted to say something. Oh yeah, for local stuff, site monitoring from the SIM. So Hansi was saying that sometimes we use the site monitoring capacity from the SIM. Some of these trials are conducted here. Many of them are not ever going to be conducted here because we're doing the prep is in the community, that kind of thing. So yeah, Kevin.
It's on. It's just a comment. Actually, first of all, congratulations. Great talk, but also for the work. And those of us who've been around long enough know this was not a small accomplishment to bring this here from Vancouver. No. Let's just say, without getting into politics and the rest of it. No. Clearly, that not the time and place.
Yeah.
It's actually just a small comment, which is there's also the Pathy fellowships. I don't know if you looked into those through kind of the MUHC Foundation, RI, Department of Medicine, etc.
Yeah.
So, and actually, like, you could leverage those for sure to get like half support for fellows and basically double your numbers.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So yeah, I would encourage you to look into that.
You hear that? She's in charge, and she's in charge. I'm just a figurehead. I know. Yeah, Ben.
So yeah, congratulations, great talk, very informative. So this has so much potential, and it's already starting to deliver. Do you feel that this model that's very distributed, like the network aspect, that's somewhat sort of focused on a disease or set of diseases and this funded in this sort of, I guess, I don't know if you'd call this soft funds, but like it has sort of an expiry date.
Yeah.
Is this the way I'm thinking of? There's, I guess PHRI has developed some of, many of these sorts of services. ACT, there's the critical care network.
Yeah.
They're all delivering nothing, I think, as comprehensive as this, but subsets of this and maybe additional things. Like, what's the best way to make this sustainable long term?
Yeah. I mean, we're hopeful, given the FI thing I mentioned at the beginning, that this is doable, going forward. And I think we're going to show impact, and we'll be able to argue strongly for its renewal. But it's an excellent question. And I think it's like striking that balance between, the engagement that we have in our network is really incredible, actually. Whenever we have our meetings, I'm always like amazed by how people are there, how much time they're willing to devote to the network, their ideas. So there's this kind of critical mass effect of people gathered around a common entity, disease, or populations that really, I think, inspires people to get active. They need to feel they get something out of it. And so that connection has to be there. So, just kind of a generic CRO type of thing, which I think PHRI is a little bit more along the lines of. They're like service-oriented CRO things, lacks that, it might be right for certain aspects. So this is one thing we're still like heavily considering, and we don't really know the answer to yet, is what do we do around, for example, trial management, data management. These are kind of generic activities that don't have to be fully nested within our network, and we would really value partnerships and that where we could actually use expertise we have, but really be able to expand its ability more broadly, and that would allow us to do something like really high level for all investigators and be more like the HRI. So I think that's where we're actually really been in active discussions, and hope that we can move some of the resources we have to, as a catalyst to build something bigger for everyone. But in terms of the science side of it and the approach we take, I think it really does require this sort of a network. My concern about how things are going so far, and we'll see how it goes, is what's the right balance in terms of centralized versus, regional resources? Because right now we're putting a lot of money out into the regions, knowing that a lot of that's development money, and it's going to take time for someone to see the fruition. And when's the right time to evaluate how that's working and readjust it? And what are the right metrics to be, evaluating to know if it's working well? And I think because we're constrained in finances, we're going to have to make some adjustments, I think, on that level. But that's where it's less clear. I mean, CTN Plus had a regional structure like many years ago. And what happened is the regional offices, we had one here, Richard Lalonde directed it, and others did as well. They basically became the research that you did, that particular site did, and it didn't actually serve the region. This, we've really made it, with deliverables and that have to be serving the region and show the engagement of the region. And so we're hopeful that it's going to bear fruit, but it's too soon to say, I think. Yeah.
Is industry engaging as much as you would hope, or it's too early to
I think they are. I think our problem right now is that the way we work with industry has also changed. So the Canadian industry has been very engaged with us and very supportive of the proposals we put forward. But then they're going up to, like, now we're in the global competition because they're big. So once you get into these big projects, they don't have like discretionary funds. You have to go up to the global level. And then we're like, well, we need to do a big project in the UK, and we need to do one in Australia. And so you're one of those ones. And then, so you have to bring this down. And so that's the kind of negotiations we're at. But they've been engaged. Yeah. I think they definitely really like the model, I think Nancy would say. Someone move the light switch. The lights are out. Oh, great. Got it. Did someone hear that they really appreciate the centralized negotiations around contracts and that sort of thing? Yeah.
Thanks, Marina. Again, just to echo what's already been said, like, congratulations, huge success. And, like this, it's just obviously phenomenal that for you and, what you're doing, but also I think for here locally as well, for the RI, but also, for the researchers here doing trials. And hopefully those conversations. So I thank you for your time to collaborate in building those kind of common synergistic platforms or structure. Amanda and Hansi have been working, I think, closely on that. So thank you for that. I guess my question is, I'm just wondering about the regional piece and engaging, as you mentioned, like the lack of access, in the prairies, and how are you incorporating the research into existing clinical care, and how is that permeating? Like, I don't know if it's primary care that you're getting into to delivery of services, or are these kind of very specialized care units? And I'm thinking of kind of the cancer, like, the research as care kind of model, and going into like the cancer.
Right. No, that's an excellent question. Actually, in HIV, research as care has been sort of like from the very beginning. So it's sort of, and if you think about Quebec as an example, like 50% of the HIV care is delivered by primary care providers in Quebec. But they're specialized in a way, but they're in the community clinics. In the prairies, they have such a shortage of physicians that is the biggest challenge at actually getting any research done is person power and capacity. They're so overwhelmed with managing just the new infections that are coming in. It's that they can't handle it. So we're really looking there at supporting allied health professionals, particularly nurses, nurse practitioners. There's a lot of already excellent work done in terms of engaging those pathways and supporting community-led responses. So unfortunately, a lot of our investigators are tied into those networks already or have developed them. So it's capitalizing on sort of existing and hopefully sometimes it's just a matter of like putting a person, a coordinator into place, and then they can, because then no one has time to do that. But if you do that, then suddenly they can get things going. We're looking in Saskatchewan, for example, as having one of our PIs who's based in Regina being the person, like the physician who would do stuff by telemedicine scripts, but working with an NP in the remote communities. So a lot of, the kind of models of care are going to be definitely decentralized. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I was thinking in telemedicine before you speak about this experience, because here in Quebec, we have a big program led by initially family medicine.
Yeah.
And then they can forward with I think we have around 4 or 5 different specialties that are engaged with the telemedicine. I don't know if you have been in contact with this kind of group that maybe is an opportunity to.
That's a good idea.
Just
Yeah, I haven't. I did many years ago on some other project I was thinking of, but I should have mentioned, and I should have put them up. We do have a Quebec regional node, and it's co-led by Bertrand Leboucher here and Madeleine Durand, who's at the CHUM. And so they're very much like developing the Quebec priorities and determining it. So we'll definitely pass that on. Yeah.
What we add to the regions is grant calls also, like for the seed funding, which allows opportunities for ECRs to develop their programs with a mentorship for those who have been part of our network for a long time, and gives that opportunity too. So we do try to facilitate the postdoc fellowship program, and we do have some postdocs from Manitoba this year, and that also helps.
Yeah, it's a challenge because it's a challenge because particularly in this space, I would have to say, time and time again, research is actually providing public health or care, and it shouldn't be that way, but it is. So, and we're doing it with dollars that, aren't huge. So relative to the scale of the problem, right? So, but that's been what we've always done. So that's what we're going to continue to do. Yeah.
There are a couple of quick comments from Dr. Pilote, and then one last question.
Okay.
There will be several calls for postdocs for Canada's Best, just so you're aware.
Yeah.
Such great initiatives and a lot of parallel with what ACT at the RI is working on, and we will for sure continue to build together.
Thank you, Louise.
And then the question from Dr. Mark Roger is, do you collaborate with sister networks globally?
Yes. Yeah. So we've had long-standing collaborations with 2 major ones, which is the ACTG in the US, which is AIDS Clinical Trials Group. And that was, we've done collaboratively trials with them and have, leading into this grant, have discussed how we could co-develop studies. Also the ANRS, which is the French network, and they're actually leaders globally of something called Globe. Well, they were involved in GLOPID, so they actually bring together a large number of European centers, and so one thing this next year we're really going to try to do is advance those partnerships, because that's something CIHR also asks us to do. They also asked us to do pandemic preparedness, believe it or not, in this grant. So yeah. There also, then I didn't mention lastly, there's some training, there's a second phase of the CTN Plus, which was capacity building and training networks. And these were funded just this past fall for 4 years, and they're tied to the regions. So there's separate regional teams that are focused on doing very sort of specific capacity building for different levels of students other than the postdoctoral fellows, as well as like capacity building and expertise. So the Quebec one is really kind of really about adaptive trials. So and Madeleine Durand is leading that. So anyone's interested in finding more about that, we can circulate, Amanda, maybe some links to the websites and to the other things. So because we encourage people to get engaged. I think the point is it's not just HIV research that we're doing. So there's a lot of stuff that spills over into, research with vulnerable communities, with different infections, and a lot of training opportunities. So it would be good to advertise those more broadly so people could get involved. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Congratulations again.
Thanks so much.